Hello, everyone. My name is Melvin Salazar. I go by Mel. I am a senior software engineer at LinkedIn, and today I'd like to talk to you about my STEM story and how I got to be a software engineer. In essence, how I got to have my dream job at a dream company. But before we get to my story, let me tell you a little bit about myself. I was born in Antigua, Guatemala, which is a small, beautiful city in the southern part of the uh, country of Guatemala, which is in Central America. I was raised up until I was about 7, uh, at which time I immigrated over to the US and I moved to Mountain View, California, which is here in the San Francisco Bay Area. My parents actually immigrated to the US about 7 years before we did. They made this sacrifice in an effort to look for a better life for myself and for my two brothers. Thankfully, and thanks to their sacrifices, we were able to legally come to this country as residents, and as mentioned, moved to California in 1992. A little bit more about myself. These are some of the things that I love. Of course, my family. Married to a wonderful woman and who was the mother of a beautiful little boy. Together, we love certain things. One of the things that we love, as you can see by the picture, is Disneyland. It's one of our favorite places to go to during vacation time. One of our family traditions is to try and go to this place at least once a year. Sometimes we go multiple times a year. Unfortunately, because of the pandemic that hit this year in 2020, we haven't been able to go as much. But we were fortunate enough to at least put in one more uh, trip to Disneyland, and that was back in January of this year, 2020. Some of the other things that I love is flying, virtually, that is. One of my dreams in life is to maybe one day uh, have my pilot's license. Um, but until then, if it does happen, I like to do so virtually. One of my favorite simulators to play, it's really not considered a game, it's a simulator, is Microsoft Flight Simulator. This year they released their newest version, which is what's pictured over here, which brings amazing reality to the world of virtual flying. So that's something that I like to do on my free time. Going with that same theme, I love playing games, especially now that we have my son, um, who's getting older by the minute. We love to play games as a family. One of our favorite games to play is this game called Grounded, which is a pre-release version of a survival game. And as a family, we like to play it and do some problem solving. So it allows us to interact with each other. So we do consider it to be quality time, even though we're in front of a screen. But nowadays, there's very little things that we can do given the pandemic that we're going through. Something else that I love is music. I like playing the drums. I like playing the ukulele. Uh, and in a previous life, I was actually a DJ. So I DJ mostly as a hobby. So that's some things about myself and some of the things that I love and my family as well. But now let's talk about my story and how I got to be a software engineer. Let's talk about what software engineering is. I was trying to figure out a way to explain what software engineering is without over complicating the definition of it. Unfortunately, as software engineers, a lot of the times we tend to overcomplicate things, including definitions. So I decided to just Google what a software engineer is to see if I could find a simple definition. The website Techopedia actually gave me a very simple, definition of what a software engineer does. It said a software engineer develops or designs new applications with the software needs of end users in mind. End users being people like yourself, people like myself, and others. Software engineering may also involve the process of analyzing existing software and modifying it to meet current application needs. Often, when you think about a software engineer or a developer, you think about them as being heads down writing new code for new applications. But most of the times, that's not the case. A lot of our time is actually spent debugging old code or improving old code. Uh, Net new code, not much net new code is written, let's put it that way. But at least for older features, it's mostly just code maintenance that we do. So, what are some of the things that a software engineer can build? Well, there's a plethora of things that software engineers can build. But I try to think about some of the things that we interact with on a day to day basis. And these are some of the things that I came up with. For example, your phones. Software engineers develop mobile applications for your phones. Desktop applications are also developed by software engineers. Web applications, so websites, when you go to google.com or linkedin.com or facebook.com, a software engineer has put a lot of work into developing those applications. Not just the way they look, but anything that might be needed to be able to render all that the way that a website looks. So the data, so all the backend services. Software engineers are involved in game development. Thank God for software engineers. And software engineers also are involved in development for robotics. Whether they're small robots that live in your house, like robot vacuums or toys, or even big commercial robots, software engineers are needed for that. Like I said, there's a plethora of things that software engineers can develop for. In fact, even your microwave at home requires a software engineer. Uh, so that's a pretty cool concept because it broadens um, what you can do as a software engineer. So you don't get bored doing only one thing. But now that we know what a software engineer is, I'd like to get into what my STEM story is. I tried to put it into bullet points, but I thought it would take a lot of slides for me to go through uh, through how I got to be a software engineer. So let me start with my early days when I first got my first job. Believe it or not, my first job right after high school was as a professional dog walker. I remember I actually used to earn pretty good money doing so. Uh, from there, I moved on to into retail. I actually started working for one of the coolest retail stores ever. You might not ever, you probably have never heard of this, but it's Tower Records. That was like the coolest place to work for when I was around 17 or 18, I believe. From there, I moved on to something that a lot of my friends were doing, a lot of uh, people, going out of high school, and that was to uh, into what was related to banking. So I became a teller at Bank of America. I did that for a few years, and then, I moved up and became what you call a personal banker, somebody who deals with loans and stuff. From Bank of America, I moved on to a small credit union in Mountain View as well, where I did basically the same thing. I was a teller and did some of the personal banking needs for customers. Um, by this time, I had already developed an interest for computers. So I made that known to my bosses. Thankfully, they gave me the opportunity to shadow the IT department, in which they gave me, some things to do that were trivial, but yet still exposed me to the world of IT. So I did that for about 6 months, where part of my time I would spend with the IT department at the credit union, and then part of my time I would spend as a teller. So that gave me exposure to what it was like to work, um, not only at a corporate level, but also within an IT department in a bigger corporation. Um, One of the things that I haven't really mentioned is my schooling. And that's because my software engineering background is what you would consider an unconventional software engineering background. So I really didn't go to school to become a software engineer. In fact, let me back up a little bit in my story. When I first came to the US, I knew no English whatsoever. So in seventh grade, I landed at the school in Los Altos, California. It was Egan Elementary School. They had just started their ESL program, English as a Second Language, which I'm very grateful for because I believe that that's what helped me learn English and um, get proficient at it. So, in my first 2 years of schooling here in the US, that's what my focus was, to learn English. Going into high school, I started developing other interests. One of the interests that I started developing was graphic design. I even took or was part of a program in high school during my junior year that gave me exposure to graphic design. However, I quickly learned that I did not have what it took to be a graphic designer, which is creativity. I have different kinds of creativity, but not the type that a graphic designer requires. So then I decided to explore other areas. One of the areas that I started exploring was computers and how they work, how they're programmed. By that time, the internet was coming around, at least the internet as we know it now. When I first started high school, schools did not have internet. But by my junior year, that's when an internet connection was installed for the school. Our computer lab actually got internet. So we were introduced to things that were called websites. With the introduction of that, there was also introduction of services that allowed us to explore programming for websites. One of the particular services I recall, it was called GeoCities. So what that allowed me to do was to create my own personal website and explore the world of HTML and how that all worked. So that's how I started my interest in programming. Now, towards my year end, towards my end of high school, um, given that I was first generation, and my parents weren't really informed in how the school system here works, I didn't pursue a higher education, like a 4 year school. Uh, and again, it was mostly because we didn't know how the school system worked. So I decided to, right after high school, just go to a junior college and see what happens. In junior college, I explored the curriculum for software engineering. Um, I'm not going to lie to you. I thought it was extremely hard. There seemed to be a lot of math involved, a lot of chemistry, and that kind of turned me off because I didn't know if I had what it took. Again, I had a lot of self doubt by that time. So I went to junior college for maybe 2 years, and I dropped out. Um, actually started exploring our other areas. And by that time, so this was around 1999, 2000, there was a lot of, I guess, what you would call vocational schools, things like the Rye University, online schooling, or Heald College. And there was this one place called ITT Tech, and saw commercials for it. So I figured I might as well give it a try and investigate what it was all about. So I decided to do so. My parents supported me because it seemed like it was a good path for me for at least me getting some type of degree. So I decided to go for a associate's degree in computer science, and that's what I did. That's what I did. Um, what this allowed me to do was to at least have a piece of paper that said that I had some type of education within the computer science field. Um, so by the time I was in that credit union that I was talking about, not only did I get exposure to IT through some of that work that they gave me, but I also now had a certificate that showed that I had interest in computer science. Right after the credit union, I actually got my very first job as a IT systems administrator. I started working for a small company where basically it was only two of us, my manager and myself. Um, and we did everything IT. Everything was housed within the company. The web server, email server, even the accounting software was all housed in internally. We didn't use third-party software or third-party providers. That was good for me because it allowed me to learn a lot. I owe a lot to this particular job because that's where a lot of my learnings happened. As a IT administrator, I learned a lot of the ins and outs of how hardware works, how websites work, and how traffic to websites work. Um, so that was good education that I got, on the job education. And then shortly after I started at this company, uh, we saw the need for us to have some type of system to keep track of our inventory, our IT inventory. So things, peripherals like computers, servers, um, switches, so anything to do with IT. So we had two options: go out and buy something, which usually is pretty expensive, or the other option that I thought about was to build something in-house. So I decided to take a risk, and I went to my boss and I told him, we have some hardware laying around where we can host a website internally. If you give me a month, I will go out, I'll buy a few books, I will learn how to program a website, and we can have something internally done. To my surprise, he agreed. So that same day, I went out and I bought two books. One book was about databases, and one book was on how to build websites with this language called PHP. So I got to work. Uh, Within a month, I taught myself how to build an internal system, including databases and a front end UI that would talk to the databases, that would keep track of all of our users and keep track of what computers users were having, what servers we had online. So that was my very, very, very first project as a developer slash systems administrator. So some things happened where I actually had to leave that job. But after 3.5 years of being in that job, I had enough knowledge to go out to the world and pursue my career in IT. So I did a few other jobs where in one of them, right after this company, I installed point of sale systems for small to medium retailers. And what I basically did in that job was installations, programming, and post-sale support for them. It was a small company, so we did a lot of the work. Um, from there, I went to another company called Open Table. At Open Table, I actually did technical support for our customers. Um, and then came LinkedIn. After 3 years of, or 3.5 years of being at Open Table, um, I felt like I couldn't go anywhere else in my career if I stayed with this company because it was a smaller company, so there wasn't much opportunity. So I had a friend who started working for LinkedIn, and he recommended that I look into perhaps working for LinkedIn as well. However, what that meant for me was that I would demote myself and start working at LinkedIn as a customer service rep. It would be a big risk for me because I was leaving a job where I had been there for 3.5 years, and even though there was no path for moving up, if anything came up, then I probably would be the next in line. So I left. I was risking leaving that and demoting myself and starting all over again. So I decided to take the risk, and it's actually one of the best risks I've ever taken in my life, at least my professional life. Um, I decided to take a job at LinkedIn, and I started working at LinkedIn as a customer service rep. As a customer service rep, we had to learn the product. We usually specialized in a specific area of the product, and that's what we provided support for. Being that I'm bilingual, I also got to support our Spanish market, which meant that I got to help others in other countries like Mexico, Spain, and other places where Spanish is spoken. Um, Eventually, again, another opportunity presented itself where there was a project that was needed uh, to develop a tool in-house for our org. So this is for global customer operations. My manager got wind of the interest that I had in development, so she asked if I was interested in developing a tool. She briefly gave me what the requirements were, and I said, sure, let me give it a try. I gathered all the necessary things. I requested, servers from I or a server from IT, and I requested access to a database. And having the knowledge that I had gathered from this transportation company where I had done my first development project, having that knowledge, I used that to create my first tool at LinkedIn. That was a success. So then more opportunities came. I built 2 or 3 other tools internally. Eventually, after about 2.5 to 3 years, my boss noticed that I really had an interest for development. So she started, helping me out to see where the area of opportunities were for me to move forward in my pursuit of becoming an engineer. Within the global customer operations, we had a technical team, and they were requiring a tools engineer. So I did what you call a rotational role, where I got to work for this technical team for 6 months. And after 6 months, if a position was still open and the manager was happy with my work, then I would get a full-time position as a tools engineer. And that's exactly what I did. So I tried it out for 6 months. After those 6 months were done, we looked to see if there was a position open, which there was. And my manager was happy with the work, and he gave me the opportunity to work with global customer operations as a tools engineer. As a tools engineer, we built tools, we developed tools for internal use, and mostly tools that our customer operations team would use. So tools that I would have used as a customer service. So I did this for another 2 years, I think. Um, and then my goal was always to actually do development in our core uh, product, which is LinkedIn.com. Um, by that time, I was going through some rough patches uh, where I started doubting myself. I didn't know if I was really going to be able to get to the point that I wanted to be at, and that was to become an actual software engineer. Um, that self doubt was making me think that I didn't have what it took to become a software engineer, mostly because of my background. I didn't have proper education. Everything that I knew up to that point was self taught, and it's a very competitive market. I always saw others as being much, much smarter than I am, and that was holding me back. So I was very close to quitting my software engineering pursuit. But then an opportunity presented itself. Um, my current boss uh, needed somebody to help out with some projects, and I had a friend who interacted, who worked closely to him, and he encouraged me to reach out to him to see if I could perhaps be given if I could be given a chance to work with that team, um, which I did. I reached out to my current boss and told him what my interests were, and told him, that ultimately I wanted to become a software engineer and develop for our main product, LinkedIn.com. So he gave me the opportunity. So I started at that time another rotational, what you consider a rotational position, um, as a software engineer for the Help Center team, which is the team that I currently work for. So I was on what you would consider a tryout for about 6 months. I did a few projects with the team, and I think I was able to prove myself. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here. And after 6 months, I reached out to my boss and asked him if there was perhaps a full-time position available. At that time, I was told that maybe there was, maybe there wasn't. Um, it wasn't looking too good, but I persisted. Several times I reached out to him to check and see if there was. And finally, he said, yes, there is. So we started the process of transitioning me to be a full time software engineer. So that happened. I became a full time software engineer. So finally, I was in my dream job. I was developing for um, part of our core product. And I was touching some of the code that, the most senior software engineers have written, which was just the coolest thing. So I've been with this team now for about 3.5 years. I want to say 3.5 years. But it's about that. And it's probably the best team that I've ever been in. Um, I've done so much learning with this team. Um, and I'm very grateful for everything that I've learned with them. Before I started with the team, with this my current team, I always thought it would be impossible for me to be writing code in Java or Scala, things that would always scare me because they just seem so intimidating and so difficult. Um, but I was proven wrong, and I was able to actually learn how to code in these languages. Um, and I'm very fortunate because, again, remember, I come from a very unconventional background when it comes to engineering. I did not go to school to become an engineer. I went to a vocational school where I got a associate's degree in computer science, something that had nothing, well, it's kind of related to computer engineering, but my focus had nothing to do with me being an actual programmer, software engineer. So I have a lot, I owe a lot to some of my team members who have taken me on and taught me the ways of becoming a software engineer. So that's basically my story as to how I became a software engineer. I hope that it inspires you uh, to become whatever it is that uh, you want to become, and to do so in a way that works for you. Remember, there's an always only one way to do things. There's always different ways to do things. Some might be proper, some ways of doing so some people might consider that are not proper. Really, you have to do what works for you. So, with that in mind, I'd like to show you some of the things that I actually work on. I was saying that I work for a team that touches our core product, which is LinkedIn.com. I want to give you a little example of that. So, this is the Help Center. So, this is the main product that I work with and that I develop for. Um, when you go to linkedin.com/help, this is the app that I contribute to. Some of the things that you see here, some of the code I've written for. Of course, not all of it. I'm talking about tiny things. As a team, we all work on different aspects. Today, I might be working on how this particular link looks or how this list of items might be sorted. Other days, I might be working on how the footer works or removing things from the footer. And that's all done through code. One of the things that I recently have been focused on is our channels strategy. Uh, this little button that you see here, everything that works behind that or everything that makes that work um, is one of the things that I lately have been really focused on. So has been one of my main projects. Unfortunately, there isn't chat available at the moment, so we can't really give you a full demo on how that works. But usually, if you need help, you would come to the help center. If you wanted to chat with someone, you would click on chat, and then the process of doing all that and of that communication, I've been fortunate enough to have worked on that. So one of the greatest satisfactions of being a software engineer is actually physically seeing the code that you've written transformed into something that you can actually interact with. It's just mind blowing. Another thing that I have recently worked on, this is our main page, linkedin.com. Um, in fact, we just shipped some of the code for this week. It's again under the help menu. I've contributed to this little help widget that you see here. Um, if you type something like, let's say, password, we want to change our password. This little box right here, I recently worked on that box. Actually, like I said, this week I finished that work. Again, part of the satisfaction of being a software engineer is seeing things, knowing that millions of people will be seeing these things, and knowing that potentially it will be helpful for millions of people, because that's basically what our core business is about, helping others and giving them opportunities that they might not have otherwise. So that's touches a little bit on what I do here at LinkedIn. Believe me, I could spend hours talking about what we do, but that just gives you a little bit of an idea of what a software engineer might work on here at LinkedIn. So, having said all that, giving you my story, knowing my background, let me give you a little advice and hopefully you can take it to heart. My first point of advice to you is don't be afraid of what seems impossible. If there's something that you can take from my story is that nothing is impossible as long as you put your mind to it. You have to put effort, of course. You have to do your part of the work to be able to get where you want to get. So don't be afraid of what seems impossible. Take risks. We call them intelligent risks. Take those risks. Go for it. Try it out. Do it. The worst outcome is you don't like it, then you move on to something else that you might like. That said, in order for you to be able to accomplish the impossible, you need to be doing learning. Whether that's from schooling, so if you, after school, high school, you decide to go into a 4-year university or um, more than that, you always have to learn. Or even if you're not going through the process of the regular education system, even if you want to become an engineer and do self-teaching, even that is possible. All you have to do is put some effort into it. One of the advices that I always give people who ask me how I have gotten to this point and how I was able to self-teach is I always think about my time as an investment. Uh, when I was at my heaviest learning, I would always weigh my options. So I would think, should I go home and watch TV for an hour or two? Or should I go home and read or watch some videos on how to code or how to accomplish something that I might want to accomplish, but I don't know how to? So you have to weigh your options. And you have to have your priorities straight too. So that said, my second point of advice is learn, learn, learn. Put in that investment for yourself. It will only be good for you. My third point of advice, no matter how silly you think questions are, don't be afraid to ask them. There's no such thing as a stupid question. That's something that I've learned, something that I keep dear to and close to my heart, um, because at my lowest point in my career, part of the problem I think was because I didn't know how to ask questions. I was always afraid of sounding silly. So please don't think there is such thing as a stupid question. Ask questions when you have them. Be curious. Believe me, he'll take you far. And my last point of advice to you is during the process of doing all of these, pursuing your goals, learning, asking questions, make sure you have fun. It's very important. You have to love what you do. And in order for you to love it, you have to be able to have fun doing so. So those are the points of advice that I have for you. Again, I hope my story uh, helps inspire you and helps drive you in pursuing your goals if you want to get into STEM. So I want to say thank you to Nuevo Foundation for allowing me to share my story with you today. Nuevo Foundation's mission is to inspire kids to be curious, to be confident, and courageous by discovering the world of STEM. And hopefully I've helped a little bit on that today. If you want to keep in contact with Nuevo Foundation, here are some ways that you can keep in touch. You can follow the socials at Nuevo Foundation. Or if you want to visit their website, it's at nuevofoundation.org. Or even if you want to directly contact Nuevo Foundation, you can do so by emailing contact@nuevofoundation.org. So that's it for my story. Thank you. I appreciate you spending time with me today. And again, I hope that I was able to inspire you today.